So today we're going to be looking at the work conditions of the people working in the factories after the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution ends, and at the same time, we're having this new period called the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age is when those big businesses in American industry are huge. We're going to have a ton of wealth. We're going to have those big business tycoons that we've talked about in the past. And this time period of extreme wealth is going to be called the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age is a historical way of kind of saying that things look pretty and shiny and things look great, but under the surface, there's a lot going wrong. So Gilded is when you have like a old paint over like a rock or something very, very quote unquote ugly. So it seems pretty on the outside, but when you look deeper, things are not all that they seem to be. And a big part of that is going to be the working conditions of the working class. So we have this increase of production, this increase of wealth for the upper class, for the wealthy. For the working class, conditions are not so great. We have a lot more profit going on in the Gilded Age, but working wages fall. They're going to drop, and the working class is going to make less a week than they did before the Industrial Revolution. We're going to also have a lot of really boring, repetitive tasks for really long hours. People would work anywhere from 10 to 18 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week. There's very, very little protection for the workers, and they're working through really poor conditions. We also have this loss of the skilled artisan. So the craftsmen that we've seen in the past are going to kind of fall by the wayside, and we're going to have this increase in just the same item over and over and over, a lot less uniqueness in what's being created. We're also going to see the loss of like a company town or a company store. There's not as much, the businesses aren't as tied so much to their local communities anymore because they're able to go to such a wide market. They're going to be focused more on anywhere and everywhere. The working conditions, a little bit more. Incredibly crowded rooms. You would have hundreds of people in a small room working shoulder to shoulder in what we call assembly lines. Assembly lines are going to be where you're standing shoulder to shoulder. Each person is going to do one thing over and over. So I might have one screw that I'm going to tighten on this larger project, and then I'll go over to someone else who will tighten a different screw or add a different component, and I will do that day in, day out for hours and hours a day. We also have this unsanitary and unsafe work conditions. So it's unsanitary because there's very little clean water. People are breathing in smoke and exhaust from the machines. The toilets are often just holes in the ground. We're also going to have unsafe conditions. There's not a lot of protections for the workers at this time. So work-related accidents are common. People will, like, if you're in a sewing industry, a lot of times women would sew their fingers together. They would just have to kind of cut off that thread and keep working. They couldn't really take a break to address it or just wrap it up so they don't bleed on the product and then get back to work. We see a lot of people losing fingers, sometimes limbs in the machinery if they're trying to fix it. And all of these injuries, there's no compensation. If you lose a hand, well, that sucks for you. Hopefully you can still work. If you can't, you're out of a job, and then you're kind of just left to find some other way to survive. Not only do we have really terrible work conditions, we also have this growing concern about the child labor that exists. So just a little context about this time period. Before the Industrial Revolution, before factories, kids commonly did work. They would help their families on the farm if they had family farms. If your family had a family-run business, like a store, kids would help out, like stocking the shelves, delivering things, helping to label things. So kids did work before factories became really big. After the factories are going to come into play during the Gilded Age, we're going to still have child labor, but we're going to have an increase in child labor. And the concern comes to the conditions the kids are working in. So we're going to have this influx of poor immigrants, and we'll talk about that next week. We also just have this increase in poor Americans during the Industrial Revolution in the Gilded Age. Because we have so many people coming in, it's a necessity for families to have their kids work. And it's also a benefit to the factories to have cheap labor. So they're going to hire a lot of kids. Up to 25% of children during the 1910s are going to be employed in manufacturing. So kind of the picture you see below. Kids were hired because they had small hands that if something gets stuck, they could reach between the cogs and the wheels in the machines to get things going again. In the mining industry, you're going to see kids that go into like small corners and holes to place explosives so that they can enlarge the mines. Kids are working in really tough situations. They're not going to receive any education. They're going to go to work as a way just to get themselves fed, especially if they're orphans. It's the only way for them to get fed in many cases. These children are not going to have any education. So once they get older, they have no choice but to continue working in the factories. They're going to work incredibly long hours, just like the adults. In the coal mines, kids often worked from 4 a.m. until 5 p.m. Kids are going to be working 12, 14, 16-hour days, just like their parents might be. And they're going through a lot of really unsafe, unhealthy conditions. A lot of them are going to be losing their teeth or their hair due to the chemicals they're being surrounded by as they're developing. And you're also going to see a lot of unsafe conditions as well, where they lose their fingers, their hands, due to the conditions in the factories they're working in.